Hi, I'm B from Next Mechanics, and on today's video, we're going to be making the Cyber Bunny from King of Tokyo. So this project was very fun. I got to use clay for the first time in years. I used to use clay a lot, making cute little characters and ornaments on a little side business called Oblobs. You could probably still find them if you Google them. But then when my makerspace gave me access to 3D printers, I moved away from the physical making side of stuff and more into the digital designing side. But when my printer was out of action, I thought it'd be fun to go back to traditional craft types and see if I was still any good. Now this is a birthday present, and originally they wanted a Cyber Bunny foam helmet, using all those skills and techniques I learned on the Iron Man video. You should go check that out if you haven't. But it ended up, we realized that it's gonna be too big to store, so a little clay sculpture would be much better. Now, if you've done clay characters before, a lot of these techniques are gonna seem pretty common practice. I know they are in the clay community. But for those who don't, I thought I should walk you through it. So to begin with, you get some wire of some sort, usually soft enough that you can bend it with your hands, but tough enough that it can still take a lot of weight. You then bend that wire into the shape of your character with the proportions. Next, to bulk them up, we're going to use tinfoil. The reason we use tinfoil and not just straight clay is clay can be kind of expensive, and you don't want to just have loads of it wasted. You're essentially using the clay more like a skin than the actual character, which is terrifying to think about. Now, I didn't use tinfoil on the arms because this character in particular has sort of lightning power arms or whatever, and I was thinking of using hot glue for them later, so I left them bare. Once I got the tinfoil shaped up to how I liked, it was time to bust out the clay. Now, the clay I'm using is air dry clay. Air dry clay is not the clay that most other channels use. Normally they use Sculpey or Fimo. The benefits to that is that they're baked clay, which means that if you have the face how you want it, or you need to add layers to it but you don't want to squish it, you can just bake it, and then it's solid and you can add to it. The only downsides is that it's relatively expensive and also quite small for what you get. So air dry clay you can buy in huge blocks, usually at, well, I found mine at a toy store of all places. So it's a lot more accessible. Now I will admit the air dry clay is more brittle than the Sculpey when it's hardened, but for what I was using, it still worked fine. Something I found out very quickly is that if you don't have wire or tinfoil somewhere, like on his feet, it's going to immediately crack off once the clay is dry. There's just nothing to actually support it, and because they're not giant blobs of clay like the body, it's just very brittle. But that's what super glue is for. So once I coated everything in a layer of clay, I started to add plates to it because this is a mechanical bunny. And the difference between doing a mechanical clay sculpture and an organic one is that with an organic one, you'll usually sort of add layers of clay like fabric or clothes, but you'll sort of blend them together. With this Cyber Bunny, I was almost doing the opposite. I would get sheets of clay, cut them square like metal panels, and then wrap them around. And even if I did blend them, because they had those hard edges from being cut out of a square, it looked a lot more harsh and robotic. So yeah, lots of sheets being rolled out and being pulled around it, and also using the knife to cut out segments and give them platings or whatever. And this is something that I didn't originally intend on, but like with all my projects, I thought I could weather it. This is actually a benefit to the clay being more brittle than Sculpey, is that if you want it to look like bits have fallen off or they're cracked or whatever, you just hit it with one of your clay tools and it just comes off. Obviously, it's not that brittle when it's first done. It's often very soft, but due to the fact that I was working on it for maybe 4 hours at a time, it was actually starting to harden as I was using it. So about 3 days into this project, I came face to face with my first major issue. That awful head. It's not that I don't like this robot bunny head, I think it's a very cool design. It's just very hard to translate to clay. It was trying to get it both smooth and also the right thickness or whatever, and I still think I did it a bit too thin on the final one, but I managed to get it close enough that I was happy with. Now originally this bunny was going to light up, but I realized if I took out all the tinfoil inside to make space for it, it was just going to sort of fall apart, and that would have sucked. But because that was the original idea, he doesn't have any clay eyeballs. Now the final thing to model on the bunny was his hands, and I forgot to do the tinfoil trick on this, but because it's just a giant like cylinder of clay with details on top of it, it was still strong enough that it didn't really matter. The fingers, however, were my enemy because they just did not want to stick on. So again, lots of super glue. Now while we wait for our clay bunny to dry, I thought it'd be time to move on to making a base for him. Why a base, you ask? Because it's what everyone else does when they make clay dudes. It's kind of fun, it's part of it. Now this is very fun for me because I got to do a few new techniques here. See, I started off with tracing one of my dishes onto cardboard And I did that 3 times to get some thickness. Now, if you look at my reference material, he's in Tokyo and he's running rampant, so I thought it'd be fun to have some broken buildings here and there. And to do those, I got bits of cardboard, cut them into squares, could also cut the bottoms on a diagonal, so that when I put them on the base, they're sort of all misshapen and look broken. I also scored little windows with my knife. Now to do the actual floor of the base. See, I don't want it to just be a flat cardboard base. I thought I could do something more interesting. See, I had a bunch of little bits of air-dried clay that had sort of gone off while I was working on it, and I thought instead of just putting it in the trash and wasting it, I could actually crunkle them up more into being little tiny rocks, covering the base in PVA glue, and then sprinkling them on. And then once the PVA glue had dried, which dries clear by the way, I could just shake it and all the loose rocks would come off and I'd have a nice rocky textured base. Now that our bunny is finished and weathered, it's time to do the hot glue side, and this did not go well. See, the hot glue would stick to the wire fine, but it'd also stick to your fingers fine. So that meant that it was very tricky to get it in the correct shapes you wanted, and when I wanted to do the eyes, that was fun to begin with, because since it was a skull, they were like sockets, I could just sort of stick the glue in and it would sort of blob out the eyes naturally. That was cool. The problem is that obviously it sort of dribbles from the gun, because mine's a very cheap one. So it meant that if you didn't do it right, you'd have little sort of dumpling spots on them, and that was not ideal. Also, a little bit of a spoiler, the paint does not stick to hot glue very well, so it's just a nightmare to work with. Still got the effect I wanted, but it was very annoying. Speaking of paint, let's do some of that. Now for the bunny, I did just a dark silvery grey all over the body, mixed from various acrylics I had lying around. And then once I was satisfied with that, I would give it a black wash. I used a neon pink for the arms and the eyes, and finally, I also dry brushed it. And dry brushing is very, very fun. Dry brushing is where you have basically paint on the brush, but it's not wet. You've wiped most of it off, so the bit that sticks is, again, it's just dry. You then slap it all over your model or whatever, and it hits all the highlights. It does like the opposite of a wash. Wash goes into the build, dry brush goes on the top of the build. And that way, it gives them a very nice texture. Now for the base, it was the same sort of deal. The buildings were just given a solid black, then I did a base coat of dark yellow with the top coat of lighter yellow for the gravel, and then finally, I dry brushed everything with white. White is brighter than all of the colors on this. That's what I did for the bunny as well, and it meant that it stood out more. Finally, you might notice that there's like a little divot in his stomach, and that's because on the picture you can see there's a little rabbit piloting the mech. So what I did is I had a hollow space in the tinfoil, painted the tinfoil pink, should have laid clay over that, it's fine, just ignore that. Did a little cardboard cutout of the rabbit, painted it black to like the shadow, and then I just had a piece of scrap plastic that I cut to the vague shape. Doesn't quite go up to the edges, but it does enough that you can't tell. And with all that, I think we're done. Doesn't that look really cool? Especially for the first time using clay in years, right? Is he perfect? No, I think there's a few things I would change. I wish the head matched the proportions of the picture better. Also with the stomach area, I think I should have done a thin sheet of clay around the sides and everything so you couldn't see the tinfoil. And then actually add the plastic sheet while the clay's still soft, so that way I can make it slightly oversized and it would definitely seal all the edges. Another thing, don't use hot glue. Never use hot glue on a painted project. It can work if you do it right, and it kind of worked for what I wanted because the paint didn't stick. It sort of looked swirly and cool, whatever, but it was a nightmare to work with. And those eyes, they are not perfect spheres, and I know they could have been better if I'd done it with the clay. If I'd let the head dry and then use soft clay for the eyes, I think I could have got a better finish. Only final thing that I would change is making sure that I actually put wire in all the pieces. Like I said, the feet were my enemy, and they were not fun to deal with, but all in all, this project came out really good. Like everything I've just said that I wish I'd changed, that's just technical side. The actual look and everything, I really love it. I think I've got like little cable details on the sides. We've got the broken snapped off ear. You know, there's fingers and hands, they're well proportioned. Hands are the worst thing anyone could make ever, no matter what medium you're in. And I did pretty well. The texturing on the base is one of my favorite things I've ever done. I think dry brushing is one of my new favorite things to do, and I just want to do it on all of my projects at some point. So yeah, I really enjoyed this project. I'm definitely going to be doing some more clay stuff. Maybe a clay Obi-Wan Kenobi when that show comes out. Maybe it could happen. Come back again soon. I'm doing the videos fortnightly now, not weekly. So come back in a fortnight and I'm going to have cardboard axolotl medieval armor. Yeah. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Ah,